Hi everyone, it's Margaret Manning here with lifeafterdeath.com. Lifeafterdeath.com is a community of people who are fascinated by the topic of life after death, the afterlife, reincarnation, and spirituality in general. We ask questions and we look to experts to help us answer them. Now, my guest today is Melinda Bernstein. Melinda is an ordained rabbi. She's a proud mother and grandmother, she says, and she believes that faith and family are at the center of life. She is a Kundalini yoga teacher, a Jewish energy healer, and a life coach. She participates in death cafe meetings where she helps other people think about their fear of dying, grief, and recovery. So now you're doing also life cycle ceremonies, weddings, and funerals, and I'm so happy to have you here with us, Melinda. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for the invitation to connect and all the way across the oceans and how close we can be via the internet. It's wonderful.
It is amazing, isn't it? And we have a large community of people who, you hardly know where they are because there's so many things in common. When we get to be at a certain stage in our lives, we're asking questions, and the same kinds of questions. So I wanted to chat with you. Well, first of all, I need to ask you about your name because I introduced you as Melinda Bernstein, and you have a middle name, which is Braha. I'm not pronouncing that properly. You can help me, but tell me why you have that as a middle name and the context for it.
Well, when I was asking myself a lot of questions about what my life was about and what life is about, life before death, life after death, life during the moments in between when we know where we're at. My middle name is pronounced Bracha. Cha is the Jewish language, the Hebrew language, the guttural sound. Bracha means blessings. So when I turned 60, I decided to use the middle name, Melinda Bracha Bernstein, in my marketing, just because I wanted to have a complete year of blessings, and I felt like I was already there with the blessings, and I wanted to share that with the world.
That's a really beautiful way of describing it. And it's also a ritual that I'm sure is part of your life, because when looking at your biography and your website, which is melindabernstein.com, you actually emanate that feeling that you put ritual at a very central part of your life. Is that correct?
That is correct. And that was not something that I chose. It was chosen, it was given to me, and then I opened it up like a proverbial box or flower, and self-discovery started from there.
No, it's wonderful. And I'm so glad you're here, because one of the topics we're going to talk about, and we have a series of interviews that we're going to do, is about your work with death cafes and also with people who are dealing with loss, with bereavement. And I'd like you to share with us some of the lessons that you have learned about grief and recovery in talking to people in that context, at funerals, for example.
Yes. Well, personally, when I first started doing these life cycle events, funerals, actually my first one in my training was very eye-opening for me in the fact that people were not prepared. Yeah. People did not know what to do, what to think of, how to live more vibrantly, how to just deal with the suddenness of it all, the angries of it all. And from there, I was deeply touched by watching others. As for myself, when my father passed 3 years ago, or 4 years ago almost, I had the luxury of being by his side and being in support with all the tools that I had learned about ritual, and having him escalate his ascension into the heavens in a very unique and profound way. What happened for me afterwards, grieving physically, I had a downfall. So many downfalls came after that, but so quickly after that, I rebuilt. And it seems like the lessons have been profound, and I'm grateful for them, but I'm also grateful to be not living at the expense of the energy that goes along with it, rather than to expand from it.
Well, thank you for sharing that. One of the things we talk about here on lifeafterdeath.com is life after death. And so, that sense that what continues after death, it can be a great source of comfort if you have a belief, but then there's also that process of the grieving. Can you talk a bit about the stages of grieving that perhaps you went through or people that you have helped have gone through?
Well, there are like different stages of grieving that psychology talks about: denial, anger, shock.
Yeah, bargaining. Yeah.
Bargaining, right.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, who is this?
Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was the person that sort of started
Right.
that conversation. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it all gets like sort of compounded when there's different energies in the field. As an example,
Mm-hmm.
I was living in Northern California. I moved back here to help my father transition. I ended up moving in with my mother shortly after my father passed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I'm sitting in our home now.
Yeah.
I called it her home or their home for many years. And so just knowing that after my father left his body, that the Jewish perspective, but also any perspective, is his soul is trying to get to its happy place or reconnect with the ascended ancestors on the lineage line. So feeling the conflict between my mother, who's been with my father for 64 years,
Yeah.
and me, of course, my whole life, but a different energy because there's a marriage and I'm a child, and so there was just so much going on, and there always is when it comes to families reuniting. They may have been estranged. They may have never worked out some of their issues with each other. I was fortunate to get away and for several years in Northern California to dine on the influence of so many beautiful people, as well as myself, in a fresh perspective, away from the Florida energy.
Mm-hmm.
So when I came back, it was liberating to be able to be a vessel and a container for him and for others.
Mm-hmm.
And then, knowing that I had physical situation that had been festering beforehand made it worse through the grief. And not a lot of people can connect the dots to that.
Mm-hmm.
What happens to their, like, wherever we have our weaknesses, it will get worse physically. And if we don't pay attention to it or don't even acknowledge that it has a relationship with emotions, then, people could go on for a really long time and suffering that.
Well, you've actually talked about two really unique lessons there that you learned from grief, which I think is important. One is that idea of kind of getting away from it, changing your situation and understanding that you've got family issues, or you've got, that one death is more complex than just that death that you are grieving. And then also, that, like you just said, that, you've actually got this whole personal physical transition that you're making, that it can have an impact on your body, that in a very physical way. And those are things you don't think about when you're grieving, because you're so deep in the sadness. Right.
And it for many people aren't tapped into that, what's going on on many levels, and they need to be educated. And fortunately, the education sort of comes after and this is the same for me too. I remember going to one functional medicine doctor when I was frustrated with my situation. I had some swelling on my knee. Okay. Not a big deal for a lot of people. Sat in a room with people that were, they had such illnesses. And when the doctor said, you have to, if you're not desperate enough, he gave this really great offer for this program. And he said, if you're not desperate enough, then you're not going to whatever, something about the program. Well, I was the first person to get up because all I wanted to do was get back on the dance floor. Yeah. And let me tell you something, I'm on the dance floor. So I did the work, but I had to be desperate enough. And that's really kind of like the key thing for people is they have to get to that desperate place. Yeah. And then they can start to put the pieces together. It's sad that we have to get to that place, but that's really what is a catalyst for so many of us. It's
a third very, very fascinating thing about grief, though, that you have to kind of be willing to put it behind you. Like, for example, people always speak in our community about, when they're divorced, when they're widowed, how hard it is to make friends again. And I think this point where, like you said, unless you really want to get out there on the dance floor again, you're not going to make friends. It's like you can stay in that state of grief for well, maybe too long. It's judgmental, but for longer than is needed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really cool. I mean, I was going to ask you about the Jewish look, the way that the Jewish tradition looks at the after-death experience, because I think the having faith that something's going forward, that they're joining people that they know and whatever, that does help with the recovery after a grieving period. Could you briefly tell us what your faith teaches?
Well, I don't know if it's a brief conversation, but
Well,
I could, in a nutshell.
In a nutshell.
In a nutshell, the first year after a person passes is called the year of mourning, and by the time that year is over, if the survivors do certain things like say Kaddish. Kaddish is a prayer that recognizes that Hashem, or Creator, whatever name you want to give to God, is the Creator, and we give Him the judgment of this particular soul, whoever has passed. Right. And it's not about us, it's not about what the soul did, but everything is in God's hands. So there's what's called the Shiva period, which is, well, actually the first 3 days after someone dies, they're sort of kind of separating. Mm-hmm. They're still in the energy field of the home. 7-day Shiva period, it's called the Shiva period, where the family actually says these prayers that helps kind of disconnect the soul and start to move on. Right. And it also helps the grieving families to settle into their new norm and acknowledge wherever their sadnesses or angers or whatever it is going on. The 30-day period after a person passes, or after the person is buried, is called the Shloshim. And in that period, it's the grappling of, again, the soul getting back to the soul family and dealing with the actual shame issues that were inside of that soul's life. So disconnecting, because shame is actually sort of like, I don't say there's a heaven and hell, but it's sort of like the negative aspect of getting to heaven. We want to release that shame. So how do we do that? Well, we have our loved ones who are praying for us or praying to God to enable us to have that smoother transition. By the time the year is past, this soul is supposed to be in a very happy place with their ancestors, their family, their soul family. There's lots of other things that are, I wouldn't say it's Jewish related. It could be shamanic Judaism, depending on who you ask. What's actually going on, maybe if someone doesn't say Kaddish for their loved one, like I didn't say Kaddish for my father. He did not want us to say Kaddish for him. That was a very difficult experience for me, and I could share with you what happened to his soul if you'd like to hear it, because this is life after death. Yeah. And so I did not, and I also for that year was grappling with my health, grappling with my mother's grief, and learning to live with my mother after being away for 3 years. And after her seeing me jump through many hoops to find out who I was and to live that expression of myself and to come to terms with the death of my marriage. It had been 13 years now. So one night I had a dream that my father was drunk and bent over, like he couldn't walk. And it woke me up to the fact that I needed to do some meditation work with his soul to get him to a happy place in heaven, to get actually those before him to a happier place. Because who knows, his father's father, and on his mother's side, it kind of goes up. Do you know the work of Dr. Daniel Four?
No, I don't.
Oh, it's ancestral healing. Ancestral medicine and healings. He's a very a very interesting guy. I should read his book and work with one of his supporters, a woman who works with him. But I found my way to getting my father to be straight. It was like, but not just straight, but happy. He was never drunk. He wasn't a drunk per se.
Yeah. It's just symbolic.
It was symbolic, and through the ritual and the meditation and the honoring, I was able to, for me, even reconnect to a star so bright in his lineage, so far back in his lineage, maybe all the way back, who could be a complete container for the remainder of his father's line, his mother's line. That on his father's side, my father's 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 fathers. Okay, now I've connected to this star. Now I feel this star. Now I know that I can divine with this star, which to me, that's what it came to be known as. It was a bright, bright light, but it was much more than that. It was a lesson in where my father's history, his roots, and people can really have like an expansive expression of life when they get in touch with these well ancestors, when they help these ancestors become well.
This, sorry to interrupt you, but this is a very interesting conversation, and we should probably continue it in another context in a bit more detail. But I think what you said here, which is very important, is that, well, for one thing, the Jewish tradition has a very unique way of connecting to ancestors in their whole structure about how they view life after death, but also from a grieving perspective, that the family can feel, it sounds like to me from what you said, the family can feel engaged and part of the transition. So I'm going to ask us to take a pause here, and we've got lots to talk about, and it's very, very interesting. But I think that the most important thing here is that in the work that you do, especially in your personalized ceremonies like the funerals and so on, you get to bring this to the people who are struggling, and that's your light to those people. And I think that's a very beautiful gift.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our Life After Death YouTube channel and visit our website at lifeafterdeath.com. We are a community of people who are fascinated by the topic of life after death and subjects like near-death experience, the afterlife, reincarnation, and spirituality. Together, we are exploring and discovering these topics together with curiosity and an open heart.